Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest James Arthur Ray, and he's here to share with us the need to redefine and refocus our values. Now, James is the author of 6 international best-selling books, including his New York Times bestseller, Harmonic Wealth, The Secret to Attracting the Life You Want. And he's a co-author and contributor to The Secret. James has worked with over 1 million people in 145 countries through his audio, video, coaching, and life and business leadership programs. He has over 1 million people who attend his live worldwide events. So let's welcome to the show, James Arthur Ray.
Well, thank you, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me.
You know, what a joy it is to have you here and to talk about values. I think we're kind of at the first quarter of the year and people are kind of rethinking things, and couldn't think of a better time than to talk about values than now.
Yeah, and a lot of people have already forgotten the goals they set, unfortunately. It's always interesting to me, Marianne, that the gym is packed in the mornings the first maybe 2 weeks, and then it seems to trail off once again. And all of us regulars kind of look at each other when we can't get any of the machines or any of the weights, and we say, just give it another week or so, and it'll be okay, which is unfortunate, actually.
Yeah, it really is, because when you look at people and goal setting, there's something to be said with being able to just kind of be slow and steady and be able to kind of, stay the course.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, consistency is the name of the game. Whether we're talking about, leadership or entrepreneurship, or even getting in good physical shape or personal relationships. I mean, it's not what you do once in a while. It's what you do consistently that defines your life.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt. Well, and so James, why don't we start with, because everyone has a story. And so what brought you to the place that you are now?
I've got a galloping, crazy story, actually. and I'm grateful for it. I haven't always enjoyed it in the moment, but sometimes it's easier to be grateful in retrospect than it is in the moment. But let me see how I can simplify. And, if any of your listeners are familiar with my book, Harmonic Wealth, my last book, I've told a lot of my story there. And, of course, my new book that's coming out first quarter of next year, The Business of Redemption, tells a lot about the next phase of my story. But I grew up as a very introverted, shy, bullied kid with thick Coke bottle glasses and buck teeth, and my father was an incredibly dynamic Protestant minister and somewhat overbearing, and so I was shy and introverted, and so that kind of just added fuel to that fire. And all through school, I pretty much just was a wallflower. I was picked on and bullied quite a bit as a young child because I was just skinny and scrawny, and I was kind of a dork, quite frankly. And that drove me to books. I picked up books early on. One of the great gifts that my dad gave to me was the passion for study and learning and reading. And so I just, spent the majority of my early years questioning in my bedroom, studying everything I could get my hands on. And it was primarily, Marianne, to ease my own pain, because I thought if I could figure out how the universe works, then I might be able to make my life better and I might feel better. And so fast forward, I went to college for 2 years, dropped out, and went to work at Southwestern Bell. At the time was, one big, Judge Green said it was a monopoly, and if you remember, broke it up at one point. But at that time, AT&T and Bell, all the Bell companies were one big company. And I went into sales, did really well there. I then, on my second anniversary, got promoted to sales as a sales trainer. And that, when I got in front of the room for the first time, even though I had grown up shy and introverted, I just knew I was home. And I just had found my purpose, and I realized that people could, listen to me, which sounds kind of odd, but up until that time, I didn't think I was worth listening to. And so from there, I went into sales management and various different managerial roles, and ended up at AT&T School of Business as a C-suite consultant, and in the late 80s, early 90s, and then jumped off and started my own business in 92. So, again, attempting to abbreviate this as much as possible, went into the world of the entrepreneur, and it did not take off quickly. It was a real struggle. And I was there were many, many years, Marianne, where I was on vision sandwiches and faith cookies, literally. I mean, I was scraping hand to mouth, and then almost threw in the towel a couple of times. And then in 2006, I was part of a big mastermind group that myself and Jack Canfield and many others who had met at National Speakers Association formed, called the Transformational Leadership Council. And we met in Vail, and a producer came with this idea to pitch to us for this movie that she was going to call The Secret. And I literally was just barely scraping by, and I got filmed for that movie. And in 2006, the movie came out. It became an internet sensation. Obviously, it was originally going to be released as a Hollywood film, but that didn't go. And so it was released on the internet, and all of us promoted it heavily who were in it. And it went crazy, went gangbusters. And still to this day, Marianne, it blows me away because particularly, not so much in the U.S. anymore, but particularly internationally, there are still people who are just getting exposed to it. I get messages at least weekly, if not, even more frequently, from people on social media who have just watched The Secret, and oh my God, are you the guy in the movie? Well, yes, I was. And it was kind of a blessing and a curse. The blessing was it catapulted me into a huge arena. And I was on Oprah twice, which was a long-term dream that I had held and vision that I had held. I was on Larry King twice. I was on the Today Show at least once a month for a long span of time. And people from all over the world, I've been really blessed. I've worked with over 1 million people from 145 different countries around the world, and they were coming from all over based upon this phenomenon, The Secret and the Law of Attraction, to, consult with me and ask me how to have a better life, which is quite humbling, frankly. And so the curse of that was that the law of attraction was a very small portion of what I ever taught. And it's not that I don't believe in it. I mean, that is a literal scientific law. It's more complex, way more complex than the movie depicts it. But nonetheless, I got kind of pigeonholed in that market, and while it was going gangbusters, I've always been a very practical guy and an entrepreneur and a business guy. I came out of AT&T School of Business, for God's sakes, and so I kind of got pigeonholed there, and the law of attraction was such a small portion of what I'd always studied and taught, and so that was the curse side of it, is that I really, had spent my entire career, and to this day, I'm into leadership and performance. That's really what I'm all about. And so anyway, the career was going gangbusters. We hit the Inc. 500 in 2009. my last book, Harmonic Wealth, was a New York Times bestseller in the first 3 days of its release. All of those things were just blowing me away in a great way. And then in 2009, your listeners may be aware and might remember, my team and I had an experiential event, a 5-day experiential event in Sedona, Arizona. And we had a lot of high-level people there. We had cosmetic dentists, we had MD doctors, we had very successful entrepreneurs. A lot of great individuals were in attendance, and we'd done this several years prior, and something went incredibly wrong. At the end of this 5-day deep dive, and the whole experience was about healing your unresolved emotional issues and traumas that psychology tells us happens pretty much in the years between birth and 13. And by the way, besides business, during all those years of devouring and studying, I also studied psychology and biology and even quantum physics. And so and all the great spiritual traditions, and I was looking at a way to synthesize all these things into a practical application. And we invested 5 days in literally, healing, uncovering unconscious issues, healing them, and integrating them so that we could empower ourselves. Because what modern psychology tells us is that about 90% of what we do on a daily basis, Marianne, is driven by our unconscious. Well, the rub is that you can't deal with something that's outside of your awareness, right? So one of our greatest challenges and opportunities is to make the unconscious conscious, because my experience proves that entrepreneurship, leadership, business is about 90% psychology and about 10% strategy. And your psychology always drives your strategy. And if that doesn't make sense to your listener, I would suggest that you consider that the way you think, feel, believe, and what you value, and that's where we kind of started this conversation, is what determines what you do and or don't do. Now, most people get it backwards, and everybody wants to learn some new strategy or some new tip or some new tool, but I can tell you from my days at AT&T School of Business that I can give you those things, and if you lay that on a dysfunctional psychology that tells me I can't and I'm not able and I'm limited and I'm stuck, then I'm not going to use that tool, if that makes sense to you. And so anyway, at the end of this 5-day deep dive, where people had literally just opened their life and opened the book and opened their hearts, and I'd spent tremendous, intimate time with these individuals in attendance and literally got to know many of them at a more deeper personal level than maybe even some of their dearest loved ones, because that's why they were there, was to share these things and to heal them. And so we had a sweat lodge as a kind of a graduation, and it really was such an infinitesimal part of the 5-day, but what we had decided to do many years prior, and we'd done this many years prior, was to have this kind of as a physical metaphor. Okay, I've made all these commitments to myself, and I'm going to go back into my business, into my life, into my relationships, and change is hard, right? That's why most people don't do it. Change is difficult. And so this physical metaphor of a sweat lodge, which is a difficult challenge, it's hot, and it's going to be a physical metaphor that if I can do this and break through here, that there might be some transference into my life. And that's what experiential events allow us to do, in my experience, is to say, if I can do that, I can do this too. Well, something went horribly wrong, and to this day, we don't really know, because there wasn't a lot of follow-up. There wasn't blood work taken or follow-up done. by the detectives in Arizona, but nonetheless, 3 of my clients and people I had gotten to know and love deeply lost their lives. And Marianne, I can't even begin to tell you how heart-wrenching that is. I mean, if you've ever lost someone, you know how that feels. And it was the antithesis of anything I had ever intended in my life or for my business. I was all about helping people and allowing them to grow, and they lost their lives. And so at the end of the day, the state of Arizona charged me with manslaughter, and which is intentional harm, which I'm still to this day aghast. I mean, I know why they did that, given how the system works, but I don't think there's a business person on this planet who would intentionally harm his or her clients and think they're going to stay in business. But nonetheless, I went, from the top of the world, so to speak, from the peak to the pit in about 30 days. I lost my Inc. 500 company. It took me 20 years to build. I lost my life savings. I lost 3 friends, first and foremost, which would have been more than enough, and 3 clients, but it didn't end. I lost my home. I went through trial, and eventually, the 4 months of trial, the jury said, no, it's not manslaughter. There's no intentional harm here. But what they did find me with was negligence. And I accept full responsibility for that. There were things missed, and God, I wish they hadn't have been. And there were things in retrospect that could have been done differently or better. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't contemplate those things. And it's I'm going to carry that with me for the rest of my days. And that's, that's a heavy burden to bear. And yet I shoulder it, and I accept it, and I take responsibility for it, because in my mind, that's the price of leadership. And that's part of my values. There's that word again, is that when it was my company, it was my event, ultimately it was my team, and it was my choice to do a dangerous activity, and so consequently, I'm responsible. And I ended up, losing my home and all those things, and I went to prison for 2 years, and I on a negligence charge, and I came out in 2013, and when I got out, which is just now, going on 6 years ago, I was $20 million in debt. I was homeless. I was in incredibly ill state of affairs physically, and I was 55 years of age. And so, no one wants to be in that position in their 30s, much less in their mid-50s. And so I had to make a choice of what I was going to do and how was I going to live the rest of my days. And that's where we are now today. That's probably not as brief as you would have liked, but nonetheless, that's how we ended up where we are today. Is I'm a much different human being. I believe I'm better. I'm wiser. I'm certainly more humble than I was when I look at myself back in 2009.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us, and the honesty, and just, because it is a heartbreaking, there's part of your journey that's very heartbreaking, and it would be for anybody. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, because everyone has a story, regardless what it is. And those stories end up shaping our lives. And when we look at, just being able to, as you talk about leadership and values, being able to, take responsibility and say, okay, these are the things I'm, responsible for, and from there deciding, because there are a lot of celebrities and people who run up against challenges, or it could be money challenges, or nothing. Regardless what the challenge is that they are faced with, and it seems that sometimes people think the easier way out is maybe committing suicide, and it's really tough to walk through what you walked through, and I mean it's just, I think the only word I have for it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking, and it was heartbreaking for the families. It was heartbreaking for everyone involved. It was heartbreaking for my family. It was heartbreaking for me. And at some point in time, we all, have these things thrown at us by life. And often, life isn't fair. And so it's in those moments where you come out of those heartbreaks and those tsunamis of life, and you can only come out one of two ways, in my experience, Marianne. You come out either bitter and blaming and angry, or you come out more awake and grateful. And I'm not here to say it's easy, but I choose the latter, because when you're in bitter blame and anger, bitterness, blame, and anger, then you're disempowered. You really don't have the ability to do anything in your life to make things better. And you're right. You mentioned suicide. I mean, suicide. We live in turbulent times. Turbulent times. I mean, you and I talked earlier about how every 20 seconds someone in our world commits suicide right now. Every 20 seconds. And for everyone who is, quote, successful, there are 20 people who attempt and don't succeed. We've got 130 people per day dying from opioid overdose, painkiller overdose. We've got, nearly 50% of our population experiencing chronic fatigue. Nearly 45% of the people say they're too exhausted to perform in their daily work. I mean, we're in turbulent times, disruptive times, and guess what? They're only going to accelerate. And so that's why when we talked earlier, I said we've got to look at our values. And this is not anything. Our school systems have failed us miserably, because they have basically not changed since the agrarian age. Our school systems are teaching people to go to work in factories with very few exceptions. And we're never, ever encouraged to find our purpose and to stop and to consider, what do I value? Society tells me I should value certain things, but what do I value? And that's, what Robert Kagan from Harvard says, only a very, very small percentage of the people get to what he calls self-authoring mind, which says, I am authoring my own life. If so what society tells me to chase economics, the money, and the accoutrements, and to be, a consumer of goods, is that really what's valuable at the end of the day? And I can tell you, there's so many lessons that I have learned from my Armageddon, if you will. And I was at the top. I mean, I had a 7,500 square foot home on Mulholland Drive in Beverly Hills. I had multiple tens of millions of dollars in business and in the bank. I had all these things that everybody thinks they want, and it was gone in 30 days. 30 days, gone. And so I had to step back and take a hard look at, who am I now that my reputation is gone, now that my purpose for living in life? Because I believe, Marianne, and hopefully this will make sense to some of your entrepreneurial listeners, because I find that the most elite performers in the entrepreneurial arena and leadership arena are those individuals who don't have a career. They found a calling. And that's what brings drive. And I found this calling years and years and years earlier. And then, so I have to ask myself, now who am I once my purpose and my calling has been ripped away? Because once everything came tumbling down and the tower fell, I wasn't able to do my work anymore. All I was doing was doing my best to dog paddle and deal with the legal issues to as I quickly approached an indictment. And so that's where I work with individuals now. What are your values? Not what mommy and daddy have told you, not what society tells you, not what social media tells you. What are your values? And most people can't answer that.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with James Arthur Ray on the need to redefine and refocus our values. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest James Arthur Ray, and he's sharing with us the need to redefine and refocus our values. Now, before we went for break, you kind of touched on something I'd love for you to expand on, and it's really interesting. When we talk about values, a lot of times people do not understand what that is. So I think there's a lot of truth to, there's some kind of confusion regarding values. You know, if you're in a relationship and you're asking somebody, hey, what are your values, to see if it's a good match, or in business, most people don't even understand what that is.
Yeah, you're right. And I'll give you a simple definition is that values 99 times out of 100. There's two kinds of values, and this is part of the deep work I do with individuals. But there's what I'll call means values, and there's end values. Well, let's say someone says they value money. Well, they don't really value money. That's a means value. When you dig deeper, what they value, let's say, is security, right? Because they think money is a means to security. Or what they value is pride. Or what they value is a feeling of achievement. And they think money is a means to that feeling. So I've just given you the second part of the answer. An ends value or an end value is 99 times out of 100 a feeling. And as we quickly approach what some people call the singularity, where, by 2020, supposedly 50% of the people we know who are on payroll are going to be out of work. If the predictions are correct, according to Forbes magazine and many others, because AIs are coming, the one thing that differentiates a human being from an AI, because let's face it, Marianne, an AI can do a mundane kind of paper-pushing job way better than you and I can. They don't
flipping burgers too.
Yeah, exactly. Mundane jobs. They don't ask for days off. They don't ask for raises. They don't complain. They don't need vacations. Right? Business owners are going to be forced, just because of profitability and just because of good business practice, to cut headcount. And again, Forbes and many others are predicting 50% gone by 2020. So the thing, it's very, very dangerous in today's world to be redundant. And it's very, very dangerous to now have a high degree of emotional intelligence, what we call EQ. And the research proves that EQ is far and away more predictive of life and business success than IQ is. And yet, again, going back to our school systems, all we're measuring is IQ. And how that comes into values is that a lot of people, values are feelings. A lot of people have disconnected themselves from their heart because we're so driven to be in our heads, particularly in the West. And so much so that you ask someone how they feel and they go, well, I think, no, I didn't ask you what you think. I'm asking you, what do you feel? Well, I think no, I didn't ask you what you think. I'm asking you, how do you feel? And I'm it's humorous, but it's sad too. And so what we're really driven to as human beings is to feel and to feel deeply. And so values, there's means and ends, and through questioning, I can always break down a means value and get to the end, the final end. And the end is going to be 99.9% certain a feeling. Now, in addition to that, and this is still, answering a lot of your question or your comment about most people don't know what values are, and you're right. In addition to that, values tend to be states of lack. And let me tell you what I mean by that, is that values shift all the time. And we tend to hold in high regard, i.e. value, the things that we tend to feel a lack of. When we feel totally safe and secure, we don't really value security that much because we just are it. If you're with me, right? We just embody it. So we don't have to put a focus on it. So what we tend to focus towards are things that we think we don't have enough of or things that we lack. If I feel completely and totally loved, then I'm not really, consciously or subconsciously looking for love, because I just am love and I just experience love, but, I may not be experiencing health, because right now my body's not doing so great, which, by the way, thank God it is. I told you I was in a really poor state of health when I came out in 2013, and I really, thank God, worked to turn that around. But hopefully that's helpful to your listeners around what values are, because here's the bottom line. We make every decision, every moment of every day based upon our values, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. And so when you can make those conscious, then decision-making becomes instantaneous. I can tell you what my top 5 values are because I write them down every single day. I'm not going to share them here because they're private, but I know what my top 5 values are. And every single morning, I part of my morning ritual is to write down my values every single morning and work consistently to embody those. And so when it comes to a decision time in my business or in my life, then decisions are instantaneous because will this align with my values or not? If it doesn't, then I don't do it.
Well, and that's really important for people to understand that you can make choices to realign your values, realign with your values as opposed to really just kind of bumping through life. I mean, these are conscious choices.
Yes, and unfortunately, most people are what Napoleon Hill called drifters. They just drift. And we've been programmed, Dr. Morris Massey's research found that our core level values lock in by the time we're about 13 years old. And they very rarely, if ever, change unless we experience a serious emotional event. And so for me, 2009, a serious emotional event is an understatement. It was a tsunami. And that caused me to step back and go, all these things that I'm giving my life to and for, the Inc. 500 company. And I'm talking about, I'm working 7-day weeks, 100-hour weeks easily. I'm on the road over almost 250 days a year. And all these things that I'm so driven to do and to accomplish and to achieve in the world. If all the accoutrements of that, the house and the big bank account and the Inc. 500 company and all that can be gone in 30 days, how valuable are they really? Because the only thing of true value in my assessment, Marianne, are those things which can never be taken away. And fortunately for me, if any of your listeners have read Harmonic Wealth, then I was already on that track of mind, because while I enjoyed all the accoutrements, I wasn't defined by them. Not really. If I would have been defined by them, I might have done what you mentioned earlier. I mean, how many stories do we hear of people who take their lives when the stock market crashes or all of their, financial wealth is gone or any of those things? And if I had been defined by those things, then I might have taken that course. Fortunately, I was defined by something more broad than that. And so that's my advocacy, because we live in a world that is still, we're talking about building walls and we're talking about the economy nonstop. And it's about terror and crime and, turn on the news. In fact, no, don't turn on the news. It's depressing. But the fact is that there's more death by suicide in our world right now than by war, terrorism, and crime combined. Now, what does that tell us about our values? and let's just talk about America for a moment, and we could talk worldwide as well. But in the wealthiest country in the world, more people are committing suicide than war, terrorism, and crime combined. And yet you turn on the television, and what do you see? You don't see anything about that. Why? Because that's not high value. What's high value is war, terrorism, crime, economy, money, walls, and that's why I'm on this mission to hopefully find one person, two people, maybe 10, maybe 100, who understand that it's time to stop and to step back and reassess. And I'm coming from a position of knowledge and experience, not just some theory.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you know what? I think a lot of people can relate to that, because there are a lot of people that go through different heartaches, different challenges. Maybe, the job that they have has closed down. They no longer have that. I mean, there are a lot of different degrees, and one person's pain, there's no way to equate that to somebody else's pain. Pain is pain. So when we look at that and how people are moving through it, I mean, it says a lot. I mean, I think a lot of times people, it's kind of like it was Sharon Letcher's book, 3 Feet from Gold, where people kind of give up, before they're kind of moving to the next level. And to kind of keep that in mind, it's like you really don't know what miracle's around the corner for you.
No, you don't. And a couple things you said I want to address. But before I do, you also don't know the resilience and the endurance and the stamina of the human spirit either. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all have so much more capability within us than we could ever imagine. And I've lived this. People say to me all the time, James, I don't think I could go through what you went through. And I said, yes, you can. Yeah, yes, you can, because you only have two choices. You either step up and stand up and keep moving forward one step at a time, or you check out. And so, if you decide not to check out, and please don't do that, then you have to just keep moving forward one step at a time. And another thing you said is that we all go through challenges, and that's true as well, because going back to the comment, I couldn't go through what you went through, it's all relative. It really is. And yeah, mine was extreme. Mine was like everything. And what I didn't mention is, in addition to, all those things I've already mentioned, losing friends and clients and losing my home and losing my business and all those things, my mom also had stage 4 cancer. And I was the family caretaker. And fortunately, because I was financially blessed, I was always there for my family to be able to step up and take care of things and take care of my parents. Well, all of a sudden now I'm fighting for my life, and I can't do that anymore either. And my mom's got stage 4 cancer, metastasized from her lungs to her liver. And thank God she's still alive today, full remission. I mean, literally, thank God. But it just kept coming and kept coming. And yet everybody's hardest thing is their hardest thing, right? So it all is relative. And then the final thing I'll say on those points is that I do a fair amount of crisis coaching now. I mean, I have a page on my website where I talk about, when your life goes into crisis, I know how that feels. And I also know what it takes to get through that. So I had a gentleman, and again, crisis is relative. Mine was overwhelming in all areas. But he got on the phone with me a couple weeks ago, and he was unfaithful to his wife, and he got caught, and he now, they're going into separation, and he's wanting to save his marriage. And here's the unfortunate situation, is that I'm talking to him on the phone, and he's talking to me about hiring me to help coach him through this. And the first thing I say is, well, I can't guarantee that you'll save your marriage. I can't guarantee that. I said, but what I can guarantee is that I can help you change the behavior that caused that to occur, because there's deep-seated issues there that, he's like, I got the most lovely wife, and I've got 2 kids, and she's great, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, and then why did you do this? Well, there's these deep-seated issues from, again, typically birth to 13, where there's emotional trauma, emotional scars, unresolved issues. And I said, I can help you with that. I said, because here's what I know. You might win her back. And he was telling me, it was possible, because she wasn't saying a definite no. And I said, you might win her back, but the very thing that drove that behavior is still there. And so as soon as you feel comfortable again, it's most probably going to rear its ugly head. And until you address it, it's not going to change. And he's like, yeah, God, that makes so much sense. And so at the end of the day, I said, well, if you want me to help you, I can help you, and here's what it's going to take. And I told him, how long it would take. I told him what the financial investment was, and he just went silent. Well, that's a lot of money. Well, he had spent the entire call telling me he'd do whatever it took to save his marriage. But the reality is he wouldn't. He wouldn't, because all of a sudden now, oh, that's a lot of money. Well, is your marriage worth that? Well, he starts backpedaling. And so my point is that so many people, change is hard, number one. And number two, it's work. And number three, many people aren't willing to do what it takes to transform their lives until they experience enough pain. Now, you would think that this gentleman I'm speaking of was in tremendous pain, but he obviously wasn't there yet, because when you get to the point where it's enough already and I'll do anything to change this, then you'll find a way to do it. And most often, unfortunately, not until.
Yeah, it's really interesting what people, it's true. When someone gets to their rock bottom, only then they're at that place where they'll do whatever it takes to make those steps to make change in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you hit rock bottom, then you finally got a firm foundation upon which to build. Yeah, right? And
rock bottom, yeah.
That's right. And you got nothing left to lose. And so, was it Janis Joplin? I'm dating myself, but, I was really, really young, and freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. And that, it's so true, is that when you hit that place, and that's, for me, I hit rock bottom. I went from mega millionaire, media star, to homeless. And not just broke, Marianne. Broke looks good from where I was. Let me tell you, I'm not insensitive at all. But, people sometimes tell me, well, I'm broke. Well, God, $20 million in debt, broke is pretty good from 20 million beneath it. And so, that's pretty rock bottom. And from that place, I was gifted the opportunity by life to say, okay, how am I going to rebuild? What do I value now? And it wasn't that I hadn't done that exercise before. Of course I had. I'd done it multiple times, but it's those significant emotional events like Dr. Morris Massey talks about that makes it all the more powerful. What do I value now? And how am I going to live the next phase of my life? And how am I going to continue if I am? Because I wasn't certain at first. And what's my message going to be, and how will it be different? And so, I had the opportunity through tremendous pain where the slate was wiped clean, And, when people tell me that they've hit rock bottom or their slate's been, everything's wiped out, again, I'm not insensitive. And I also believe there's nothing but blue sky, because you get the opportunity to start again much more intelligently. It's zero-based thinking. If you're not at rock bottom, one of the things I encourage my clients to do is to ask themselves the question: given what I know today, and where I am today, what would I not do again in my business and my life, given what I know today? And if you're still doing it, then maybe it's time to jettison that.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. You mentioned this. You asked yourself that question, what do I value now? And I think a lot of times people don't understand that they can make that pivot point.
Yeah, and because we get so caught up in the doing. And, as tried as this may sound, we are called human beings for a reason, and we need to take time to be. And yet we don't often do that. And I don't know, I write a mini blog on social media every day called Triple Espresso, and I write it at about 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm a really early riser. I get up at 3:45 every day, and because I have what I call my prime objective, which is my morning ritual routine, where I take care of me before I ever start looking at my business. I refuse to look at my phone or my computer or my email before 6:30. I get up at 3:45, and I absolutely will not look at my phone until 6:30. But nonetheless, I write a mini blog every morning extemporaneously, and maybe you've seen it, Marianne. It's called Triple Espresso, and I named it that because I wanted it to be a strong shot of wake up in the morning for everybody, and it's really gained some traction. I to my knowledge, and my knowledge is not comprehensive, but to my knowledge, I was the first person to put long copy on social media, and I didn't know if people would even read it, because so many people just scroll. But it's gotten some traction. It's really gotten some traction on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And there are people who regularly read that in the morning, and they start their day, and they comment, and they share, and all that, which is really great for me. And because I write it daily extemporaneously, it's not something that's automatically puts out. It's part of my catharsis every morning and my contemplation every morning. But what I wrote this morning was that we try to fool ourselves into thinking we have time. My friend I was talking about, well, let me think about it, and I'll circle back with you. Well, leaders make decisions, period. Amateurs want to think about it. And I'm not saying to go off half-cocked, but what I talk a lot about in my new book, The Business of Redemption, is that leaders must make decisions based upon the information that they have. And what we tend to do, particularly in Western culture, is we ignore the fact that time is finite. Even if we live to be 125, time is finite. And there's no guarantees. And so, we have to make a decision, and the only time we really have is now. And so the time to do these things we're talking about is now. And I've been talking about AIs and disruption and quoting Forbes and all of this research that I'm devouring right now for quite some time. And frankly, most people are ignoring it, and they're not going to take action upon it until it drops in their lap. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier around how people change and how they formulate their values. But, most people don't decide to go on a health and fitness program and change their diet until doctor says you're going to have a heart attack. Most people don't decide to work on their marriage until, one partner says, I'm out of here. I'm over this. I'm moving out. And we don't tend to, invest in a fire alarm until after the kitchen's burnt down and so on and so forth. So it doesn't have to be that way. But unfortunately, that's how it often is. And there's going to be a lot of people, as much as I'm advocating, clarify your values now, reinvent yourself, prepare yourself, educate yourself, define your purpose for life and living, and build your life and your business around those things. Whether you become a mega millionaire or not is irrelevant. What's promised is that you will have a fulfilling life. And that's all that matters at the end of the day. But there's still going to, be a lot of people who are going to be displaced, when jobs continue to drop. And then they're going to figure out in the midst of crises, what am I going to do now? They're going to have to try and figure it out in the midst of crises versus doing it proactively.
And that definitely is no fun, is trying to figure out how you're going to readjust your life while you're also shouldered, carrying many burdens at the same time.
Exactly. Believe me, I know. And I mean, it's difficult and uncomfortable to reinvent yourself in your 30s. And it feels sometimes next to impossible in your 50s. But, what the projections are telling us is that that's something we're going to have to become accustomed to and comfortable with, because most of us are going to have to reinvent ourselves, not just once, but a minimum of 5 times as things continue to change and change and change and change.
Well, I hear that the 50s are the new 30s, so I think we're going to be okay.
I hope so. I hope so.
Well, for our listeners that would like to connect with you and also be part, because I know you do the Triple Espresso that you mentioned, where can they get that, and how can they, be included in that and be part of your community?
Well, I'm all over social media. On Instagram, I'm James Arthur Ray, and on Twitter, it's at James A. Ray. On Facebook, it's official James Arthur Ray. And then, of course, the very best place to go is my website, which is jamesray.com. And for your listeners who go there right now, there's a free ebook I'm offering just for visiting the website, and it's called How to Conquer versus Quit. And it's based on 12 principles that I used, going through, again, what we've been discussing to learn how to conquer versus quit, give up, and stop. And so I hope they will connect. I'd love to. And, of course, on jamesray.com, all my coaching, we have a variety of coaching opportunities and different vehicles, from online to group to one-on-one. Crisis coaching is there, and many, many other things as well. So I would love to have your listeners visit, and I'd be honored to help you if I'm able to do that.
I think that's so important. We're going through a time right now where people need help more than ever. And, there's that saying that you can't take somebody someplace you haven't been. And so
True.
People that are having these difficult times and feel like they're, they're at the lowest part of their lives, you're definitely someone that can help lead them out of the darkness.
Well, and that's one of the gifts that life has given me. It's a gift wrapped in pain, but it's a gift nonetheless. And I remember I've had 6 major mentors in my life, and most recently is Zen Master. His name is Roshi. He's the highest ranking Zen Master outside of Japan, and he really stood shoulder to shoulder with me during the whole meltdown. And my supposed friends and colleagues were all just running right and left. I mean, it's amazing, Marianne, how someone can, just love you and want to do business with you and join ventures with you and all of these things until you become the one that the media is attacking, and then all of a sudden, they disappear, and that hurts. But even worse than that are the ones who stab you in the back and then disappear. And so I was really in anguish at one point in time, and this is talking to your listener. If you are in a place of crisis and difficulty right now, I was talking to Roshi, and I said, all these people and leaders in the industry who I know and I thought I knew well, and they were all my friends and colleagues, they're gone. Not an email, not a text, not a phone call, nothing. And he said to me, James, he said, we all hope that our friends will be there for us when things go sideways. They won't. Now that sounds somewhat cynical, but it's the truth nonetheless. And it's not that they're bad people. They're good people. Everybody does the best they can with what they know and what they have available. But what I had to come to an understanding of is that everybody is so busy dealing with their own issues and pain and challenges that they don't have a lot of bandwidth to deal with yours. And so to that end, and your point, Marianne, sometimes it feels very, very lonely. And if one of your listeners is in that position today, you know what I'm talking about. It feels very lonely, and no one understands you. And it feels like no one's standing there with you. And you're fortunate if you have, two people, one person who will stand there with you. And so that's where sometimes reaching out to someone who has been there, not in theory, but in experience, can be very powerful for you.
Really makes a difference. Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today. I'm really grateful that you really opened your heart and shared with us, and I think it's really great to have this discussion in regards to values and provides a lot of value for our listeners as well.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure, and I believe we're all here to serve. And service is the rent we pay for the privilege of life. And so I'm just grateful to be able to serve. And I know you're doing the same. And thank you for having me. And just keep doing great things, Marianne, because the world needs it.
Well, and you keep doing what you're doing because the world needs you as well, James.
So. I will. Thank you.
Well, thank you, James. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about the need to redefine and refocus our values. Again, if you'd like to connect with James Arthur Ray, you can at his website, jamesray.com, and we'll have the link below. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.